So, Descartes' philosophy is mostly characterized by his saying, his most famous sentence, which is in Latin, cogito ergo sum, which means in English, I think therefore I am. To him, this was the sort of foundational and self-evident and indubitable truth on which all of philosophy and all knowledge is predicated. He reaches this conclusion of the cogito, I think therefore I am, based on the fact that we are thinking creatures and we can pretty much doubt everything of the external world, but we cannot doubt that we are doing this process of doubt. We cannot doubt that we are thinking, because in doing so, we must think further. And so, we are thinking at least, but in order to be thinking, we must be thinking things. So the sort of foundational truth that he concludes is that we are thinking things. Descartes was educated by the Jesuits at La Flèche. He was introduced to a sort of innovative form of Aristotelian Thomism, heavily influenced by his contemporary, the Spanish Jesuit Francisco Suarez, which was, well, departed certainly from the traditional teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas, I think, would feel quite alien to some of the innovations given by Francisco Suarez. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why Descartes felt that, Aristotelian Thomism was very boring, and in one of his writings he says that it doesn't say much about the world. It doesn't say anything relevant of the world. It only categorizes things as what they are and doesn't say anything. He wasn't very interested in that. So moving on, his thought is based on this principle of I think therefore I am, and certainly represents a shift in philosophy. Ancient philosophy held a view of ontology which was predicated on the notion that we are objects and have a participation relation in the external world. Descartes' ontology has a shift to a sort of subject perception relation to the external world. His most famous work, the Meditations, can be divided into 4 parts, even though there are 6 volumes. The first part is namely that we can question the very nature of our senses, because every now and then we are deceived by them. He gives the instance of a time where he is walking down the street, and what from a distance seemed like a tree, as he approaches, is something else. I think he claims it's a man. I might be wrong. Correct me there, please, if I'm wrong. But he gives other instances of deception that we have through the senses. Okay, so that's the first part of the Meditations. Of course, he goes on to claim in the first part of the Meditations that we should doubt altogether that our senses are accurate and reliable, and even speculates that perhaps we're being deceived by an evil demon. And this notion of of deception of the external world is, if you want to learn Cartesian philosophy, just watch The Matrix, and you'll get very much the gist of what Descartes meant. Of reality being a very deceptive thing. His second part in the Meditations focuses on the primacy of the mind over the body, and why the knowledge gained from the intellect and reason is superior to the knowledge gained by the body and by experience. He claims that certain truths, such as mathematical truths, are certain and they are necessary, and therefore they are superior to the truths that we know through the senses, which are contingent and are certainly less certain according to his view, because he gives examples in the first meditation as to why they every now and then deceive us. The third meditation, he answers primarily to the notion that we can be deceived by an evil demon, and he claims that because God is all-loving and because God is all-powerful, he would not allow us to be deceived by an evil demon. and therefore we should trust the external world because God does not allow deception to occur. So the main gist is that our senses are dubious on their own, but because God does not allow deception to take place, we can trust the external world and so forth. And the principal point on which the whole of his philosophy starts off is on the cogito. That is the foundational and self-evident truth on which the whole of ontology and metaphysics is based upon, namely that I exist and that I think, therefore I am. I want to bring in a critique given by one of his contemporary thinkers, which isn't actually, he doesn't address this critique in the Meditations, even though he answers a few other thinkers such as Mersenne and Pierre Gassendi. He does not enter to the critique given by the Dominican Antoine Gaudin, and the critique begins by doubting this very notion that the whole of philosophy is predicated on the cogito. Antoine Gaudin says that no, the whole of philosophy is predicated on the principle of non-contradiction, namely that a thing is not a thing and not a thing at the same time. The 20th century Dominican theologian and Thomist, Garrigou-Lagrange, writes of this critique of Cartesianism in his book Reality, a Synthesis of Thomistic Thought. He says, quote, "The first idea which the intellect conceives, its most evident idea into which it resolves all other ideas, is the idea of being. Grasping this first idea, the intellect cannot but grasp also the immediate consequences of that idea, namely first principles as laws of reality. If human intelligence doubts the evidence of, say, the principle of contradiction, then, as Thomists have repeated since the 17th century, the principle of Descartes simply vanishes. If the principle is not certain, then I might be simultaneously existent and non-existent. Then my personal thought is not to be distinguished from impersonal thought, nor personal thought from the subconscious, or even from the unconscious. The universal proposition, nothing can simultaneously both be and not be, is a necessary presupposition of the particular proposition I am, and I cannot simultaneously be and not be. Universal knowledge therefore precedes particular knowledge." Unquote. So the whole of philosophy and the whole of metaphysics is predicated on the principle of non-contradiction, and not on the principle of I think, therefore I am. This is the foundation of reality, and our thought is not the foundation of reality itself. And hence the main point that Descartes' thinking represents a shift to a subject perception notion of the external world. And speaking of perception, I also want to critique the notion that Descartes gives that, we can be deceived by our senses because of a few instances in which whereby a deception occurs. If we take a pencil and put it in a glass of water, the deception does not occur by the senses if we think that the pencil is actually bent inside the glass of water. All our senses tell us is that there is a pencil in a glass of water. Whether or not we know the nature of refractive indexes and the nature of light bending in another medium is completely independent of the fact that all we are experiencing is only a phenomena, and that phenomena is the pencil going into the glass of water. We are not experiencing the change in the pencil itself. All we are experiencing is the thing. Now, the perception or the deception comes through the intellect. Now, the intellect does the perception, the judgment, and the contemplation. If we are deceived, we will have a wrong judgment and we will wrongly contemplate on the thing. But if we perceive the thing as it is, then we will rightly judge it as what it is and contemplate on it properly. So I I don't think that Descartes is right to say that we are deceived by the senses. Rather, we are deceived by our perception or deception of this information, of this data. So perhaps that can say something of the nature of our intellect, that perhaps every now and then we are deceived by our very own judgments, but not the raw data that we experience. That is not what in itself deceives us. I hope you can I hope you understood my main criticism of Cartesianism, and so the main 2 points is the principle of non-contradiction being the foundation of metaphysics and reality, and secondly, we are not deceived by the senses, but rather by the intellect if it takes place, if deception takes place. Those are the two things that I think Descartes um, ignores and goes about to write wrongly so in the rest of his philosophy. I hope you understood, and perhaps you could reply, maybe writing down something or through a video. I don't know. But thank you, and God bless.